Have you ever imagined sharing years of your life with someone and discovering that all this time you were just a pawn in their game? Have you ever thought about giving yourself completely, loving, trusting, making plans, and in the end, discovering that you were the plano bethis? Is the story of a woman who experienced exactly that. She believed she had a solid marriage, a stable relationship built on love and companionship. But in reality, she was just part of a lie, carefully crafted by someone who knew exactly how to hide the truth. In this shocking and revolting true story, we delve into the story of a woman who discovered, in the cruelest way possible, that the man she slept with every night, had another family, another home, another woman, other children, an entire parallel life, built on lies, and she, unbeknownst to herself, was part of this charade. From the start, she sensed something was wrong. It wasn't just intuition. It was the inconsistent schedules, the lame excuses, the cell phone he never put down, the weekends working, the meaningless trips. But how could you accuse someone who, to your face, professed to love you with such conviction? How could you distrust someone who kisses your forehead every night and swears you're the love of his life? She tried to stifle her doubt. She tried to convince herself it was paranoia, that he was just a busy man, that routine wore down any relationship. But little by little, the little clues began to accumulate. A forgotten receipt in his pants pocket, a missed call with a strange name on the display, a Mother's Day card in childish handwriting she'd never seen before. And then came the crack. The pain in her chest. The silent shattering of a world she thought she knew. The character in this true story, which for now we'll call Lúcia, represents thousands of women who, even when suspicious, prefer to close their eyes to avoid facing the depths of the abyss. But Lúcia could no longer pretend. And when the truth came out, she not only lost the man she thought she loved, she lost her footing, she lost herself. Throughout this 11-part series of stories, you'll follow every step of this cruel discovery. From the first sign that something was wrong, through confrontation, denial, and emotional breakdown, until she finally had to decide whether to continue pretending, or face the truth and rebuild her life from scratch. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of rebuilding, of survival, of strength. Prepare to be outraged, moved, and perhaps even see yourself between the lines of this story. Because what happened to Lúcia could be happening right now to someone very close to you. And worse, it could be happening to you. She was cruelly betrayed, made a fool of while he lived a double life with another woman, another house, and other children. A betrayal discovered in the harshest way possible, and her heartfelt confession will leave you speechless. And now, I ask you, what would you do if you found out that the person you love has another family in hiding? Comment below. This story needs to be discussed. It needs to be heard. If you've ever been through something like this, or know someone who has, share this video, and if you want to follow each chapter of this intense journey, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. The next parts will mess with you in ways you don't expect.
Hi, my name is Lúcia, and I confess, I'm still ashamed to share everything I experienced. Because betrayal, besides destroying us, always seems to find a way to shame us. Even when we're not guilty of anything. Even when we were merely victims of a farce so well constructed that, for years, it seemed real. I lived with the same man for 8 years. 8 long years in which I trusted, surrendered myself, built plans, and a future. He told me he loved me, made declarations on special occasions, brought me flowers every now and then, and when he didn't, he always had a convincing excuse. It was a busy day. The hospital was chaotic, I forgot, but I thought about you the whole time. And I believed him. Because we want to believe. For a long time, I swallowed the discomfort, the internal warnings that told me something was wrong. But I kept quiet. I thought it was all in my head. Or rather, I convinced myself it was. He did this with frightening skill. When I questioned any detail, like the schedule changes, the weekend absences, the missed calls, he would get angry. He called me insecure, controlling, and told me I needed therapy. And I believed it. I started blaming myself for everything. I thought that if I were prettier, calmer, more understanding, he would be more present, more genuine, more mine. But what I didn't know was that, Deep down, he was never completely mine. Not even for a day. The clues slowly began to accumulate. First, there was a receipt from an expensive restaurant in his pants pocket on a date. He claimed to be on duty. Then, a faded message, a strange perfume on his shirt. But the final straw came from outside. A friend of mine, Carla, told me she saw him entering a restaurant with a woman and 2 children. She said she found the affectionate way he treated the children strange. Like a father. At that moment, my heart froze. My body trembled. My head felt dizzy. But even so, I tried to rationalize. It must be his sister, his nephews, ... I thought about it for a few minutes, until she showed me a photo. Taken from a distance, discreet, but clear. It was him. Holding hands with a woman, smiling at 2 children. He looked ... happy. That night, he arrived home as usual. He greeted me with a kiss, took off his shoes, and asked about my day. And there I was, frozen. Smiling on the outside, screaming on the inside. I felt dirty, deceived, completely exposed. But I didn't say anything. Not yet, because I needed to be sure. The next day, I created a fake profile and began investigating. I searched for names, scoured social media, joined neighborhood groups, and looked for any clue. Until I found it. A profile of a smiling woman, hugging him. In the photos, 2 children. And in several captions, phrases like, family, my foundation, my love. She called him my husband. She wore the same wedding ring he wore with me. My world collapsed. With each click, a part of me died. The photos were recent. The dates matched the days he said he was in the hospital. And those children. One of them was 5. This means he started this double life 2 years after we started living together. In other words, he built another family while sleeping in my bed. I trembled. I vomited. Literally. The shock was physical. I felt betrayed not only as a woman, but as a human being. As someone who believed words that now felt like poison. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was cruel. I waited for him to get home. From work, I sat on the couch. And I asked, in the strongest voice I could muster, "Do you have another family?" His face paled. He said nothing for a few seconds. He just looked at me, as if trying to understand what I knew. And then he lied. Of course, he lied. He said it was an ex who made up stories. That he'd helped me with money for a while. That I was freaking out. I listened. Quietly. Until I showed him the photo. The photo of him with his wife and kids, smiling as if nothing was wrong. He stammered. He tried to say it was complicated. That he was trying to work it out. That he didn't want to hurt me. That he loved me. Yes, he had the nerve to say. He loved me while admitting he had another house. Another wife. 2 young children with someone else. In that moment, I didn't cry. Strangely, I felt a calm, a coolness. As if my body knew there was no point in despairing anymore. As if my mind was saying, "You've already lost everything. Now all that's left is to survive." But the worst was yet to come. He asked to talk later, calmly. He said he was going out to clear his head. And he did. Hours later, I found out he'd gone straight to her house. The other one. As if I were a burden he needed to get rid of. That day, I realized I was the secret. I was the other one. The idiot. The one he hid from his official family. And the only thing left for me, ... was to decide what to do with it. After he left that night, something in me changed. It wasn't just the pain that deepened. It was the wounded pride that rose up inside me like a silent scream. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped together, staring at the floor as if there lay the answer to what to do with my life. And deep down, I already knew. He wasn't coming back to me. At least, not really. Maybe he'd come back with words, with promises, with that manipulative way of distorting reality. But really come back. Come back with sincere remorse, with the courage to make amends for the harm he'd done. No, because whoever builds an entire life with 2 families at the same time, doesn't love either. You love yourself. You love the power of being desired twice over. The next morning, he arrived home as if he were just returning from a simple walk. He brought coffee, he brought bread, and a nervous smile on his face. He looked at me with a look that begged for forgiveness without saying a word. He sat down, across from me, and began to talk. He said he never meant to hurt me. That the other story began before us, and that he didn't know how to get out of it. That he was trapped. That he felt torn. That the children weren't to blame. That he had obligations. That he loved me, yes, but he didn't know how to choose. In that moment, I heard it all. But for the first time, not as a woman in love. I listened, like someone who had been forcibly torn from a dream. You had two lives, and neither of them was real, was all I said. He remained silent. He knew there was no longer any justification, that there was no alternative version. That afternoon, I asked him to leave. I didn't yell. I didn't cry in front of him. I just asked him to leave. He hesitated, as if he still believed that with time I might forgive him. But he did. When he left, I locked myself in my room and cried as if I were burying someone. And, in a way, I was. The woman I went with him died there. In the days that followed, he texted me. He called. Sometimes he drove past the house. I could see him through the window. But I didn't answer. I didn't respond. I didn't want to hear any more excuses. I wanted to breathe. I wanted to understand. It was at that moment that I started replaying the entire relationship in my head. The birthdays he had to work. The business trips he took every 2 months. The Christmases he spent with his sick mother. The Father's Days he said he hated because his dad died. It all made sense now. It was all a lie. I started contacting therapists, old friends. I reactivated my gym membership. I rewatched movies I loved. Everything seemed small compared to the damage, but they were ways to try to remember myself. Who was Lúcia before she became just a coward's plan B? Meanwhile, I discovered that the other woman, the official one, was unaware of my existence. Yes, he lied to both of us. He told her he was single, that he lived alone, that he worked long shifts, that his shifts took up all his time. And the worst part, she believed it too. It was as if we were on the same sinking ship, unaware that we existed for each other. And then, in a fit of righteousness, I contacted her. I sent a simple, direct message. With proof. Screenshots. Photos, videos, my face, my story. I said I didn't want revenge, but that she deserved to know the truth. And that's how it all blew up. She wrote back to me days later, destroyed. She said she felt like trash, that she felt stupid, that she didn't know how to face her children, her parents, the world, that she'd also been deceived. We cried together, even from a distance. We talked for hours. We discovered crossed dates, copied lies, identical sentences. He used the same rhetoric with me and her, the same vows of love, the same excuses, the same disappearances. It was a cycle of manipulation so tightly wound it felt like something out of a movie. But it was our life. After that, he tried to turn the tables. He sent messages saying that we were both against him, that we were crazy, that we ruined everything, that he wanted peace. But the truth is, he lost control, and men like him hate losing control. It was at that moment that I knew my healing would only come if I completely distanced myself. I blocked him from everything. I changed my locks. I changed my routine. I started intensive therapy. But even so, some nights I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing. His face still haunted my nightmares. The feeling of having been deceived for so long consumed me, and then came the guilt. That damn guilt that none of us should feel, but that insists on appearing. Was I blind? Did I ignore obvious signs? Did he cheat on me from the start? Did he ever love me? Unanswered questions, but one thing I learned. I didn't deserve this. No woman does. And if you're going through something similar, please, don't remain silent. Don't accept anything less than respect. Don't think that's what love is. Because it isn't. In the next part, I'll tell you what happened when his family found out. And what he did next, ... It was dirtier than I could have imagined. After that fateful confrontation, I imagined the truth would be the relief I so desperately needed. I thought the internal storm would finally begin to calm and I could somehow find peace. But reality proved far more cruel than I could have imagined. The truth, instead of liberating, opened a series of doors I wished I had never opened. It was shortly after that night that my complaint was leaked to his family. And then, everything changed. I thought that if they at least knew, they might welcome me, support me, or even comfort me, but it wasn't like that at all. Instead, it was like falling into a deep, dark pit, where no one seemed willing to lend a helping hand. His mother, the woman I'd always found kind and welcoming, called me one day. What I'd expected to be a supportive conversation turned into a storm of accusations that overwhelmed me. She cried, but not for me. She cried with rage. She called me an invader, said I was destroying their family, that I had no right to speak or interfere in her son's life. She even called me wretched, as if I were responsible for all of this, and insisted that he had always been an upstanding and good man. It was like being punched in the gut. I had not only lost the man I loved, but also the support of the family I once thought would be mine. They chose to close their eyes to the truth, to maintain the fantasy of a faithful man, rather than face the devastation that secret caused us all. But what hurt me even more was knowing that his entire family knew about the existence of the other woman, the second family, and that they were silently covering it all up. It was an invisible network of complicity that made him feel protected, untouchable, above judgment. Friends who denied knowing anything, relatives who pretended to ignore the obvious. It was all part of a silent pact to maintain the illusion. I felt isolated, as if I were on an island surrounded by people pretending not to see me. The loneliness was immense, painful, and suffocating. I had proof, yes, but that proof wasn't enough to overturn an entire structure built around silence, denial, and convenience. In the months that followed, I experienced a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I hated him. I hated myself. I felt invisible, and at the same time, completely exposed and vulnerable. It was like being lost in a dark maze, not knowing where to turn or how to escape the pain. I sought strength wherever I could find it among true friends who didn't judge me. In support groups for betrayed women, in therapy, little by little, I began to realize that the pain I felt didn't have to be my final sentence, but could be the starting point for reinventing and rebuilding myself. But just when I thought I was starting to put the pieces of my life back together, he came back. Not with a sincere apology, but with manipulation and empty promises. He said he'd left the other woman, that he wanted to make things right with me, that he loved me. Words that tore me apart, but that I could no longer accept. I was exhausted by the lies, the manipulation, the false hope. I rejected him in every way possible, with all my strength, because taking him back would mean accepting years of deception and betrayal. It was in this part of my story that I learned what it means to truly love yourself enough to say no when everything inside you wants to give in, to protect your heart and your dignity. Today, I rebuild my life one step at a time, slowly but surely. I still feel pain, I still carry fear, but I also retain hope and strength to start over. I relearn to trust first in myself, then in those who deserve that trust. After I closed the door on him, the immediate sense of relief I'd hoped for didn't come. Instead, it was as if a vast void had taken over me, a dark, silent space that seemed to devour everything around me. The absence of the man who once promised to be my safe haven became a deafening silence, echoing within my chest, and doubts, hurts, and fears piled up. Transforming my days into a veritable battlefield, I felt lost. I no longer knew who I was. Without him, that confident woman, full of dreams and plans, had become someone hiding behind the curtains of her own life, afraid to face the world. What I felt was a chaotic mix of anger, profound sadness, crushing shame, and a constant sense of failure. The shame came not only from the betrayal, but from the cruel way I felt deceived, used as a pawn in a game I wasn't part of. I often cried alone, wondering where I had gone wrong, why I hadn't realized it sooner, if I had been blind or simply too foolish to see what was happening. But despite the pain that seemed to crush my soul, I knew I couldn't give in to despair. I had to get up, even if each step was excruciating. That's how my true struggle began, a battle for myself, for my dignity, and for my inner peace. I sought help in therapy, a place where, at first, everything was incredibly difficult. Revisiting that story, putting into words what seemed inexplicable, facing the raw truth, it was all like opening a still bleeding wound. But little by little, those conversations helped me understand that it wasn't my fault, that no one deserves to be betrayed, that my pain was real and needed to be welcomed and respected. At the same time, I began caring for my body as a way to alleviate the anguish that seemed to cling to my skin. I took long walks in the fresh air and started going to the gym again, small actions that made me feel alive. Even when my soul felt dead, each step was a silent victory against the sadness that overwhelmed me. I also reconnected with true friends, those who knew my essence and didn't need explanations to understand my pain. These friendships became my lifeline in the darkest days, the shoulder I could cry on without fear of judgment. In the midst of this difficult rebuilding process, the most difficult days arrived. The unexpected encounters, the invasive messages, his attempts to reconnect, as if he knew exactly where to press to touch my open wounds and confuse my broken heart. It was a cruel game, where he used sweet words and false promises to try to reel me in again, but I was stronger than before. I didn't let myself be fooled. I didn't allow him to steal my peace again. Every time he tried, I resisted, remembering everything I'd been through, all the sleepless nights, all the tears I'd shed. Even so, some nights remained torture. The silence of the house left me vulnerable to memories, to the obsessive thoughts that insisted on tormenting me. I would wake in the middle of the night, my heart racing, reliving everything as if for the first time, feeling the betrayal again, with the same devastating intensity. It was a long process, full of ups and downs, and I often wanted to give up, but deep down, something inside me told me I deserved more. Much more. That pain, however great, couldn't be the end of my story. Today, when I look back, I recognize the woman I was, the one who suffered, who was betrayed, who cried until exhaustion, but who also stood up, resisted, and chose herself above all else. And that's the woman I want to be from now on. Without fear, without shame, without accepting less than I deserve. I know many women go through the same thing as me. That's why I'm sharing my story, to let them know they're not alone. That pain can be overcome, and that hope can be reborn, even in the darkest moments. I never imagined how much betrayal could affect every aspect of my existence until I experienced this soul-rending pain firsthand. After so many months immersed in this whirlwind of emotions, I realized that the hardest battle wasn't against him, the man who deceived me and destroyed everything, but against myself. It was a silent war, an intense and devastating internal struggle, where the desire to forgive clashed with the urgent need to protect myself. The tenuous hope of rebuilding a future teetered against the cruel fear of being deceived once again. The nights became my worst enemy. Lying in the darkness of my room, the silence suffocated me, while my mind churned with an avalanche of disconnected thoughts. I mixed happy memories, those few, true ones that still gave me a glimmer of hope, with painful scenes that insisted on haunting me, repeating themselves like a horror film on loop. I relived each moment, trying in vain to understand where everything began to fall apart, searching for answers that always seemed to slip through my fingers. Sometimes, I felt as if I were lost in a maze of doubts with no way out. I felt a deep anguish when I thought about the future. Would I ever be able to trust again? Would I be able to love without fear, without reservations? Or would I be condemned to forever carry the scars of that betrayal, like an invisible scar no one else could see, but which ached silently? Therapy became my refuge, a space where I could gradually put into words what felt like an untamable turmoil within me. In the sessions, I learned to embrace my pain, to face my feelings without judgment, and to accept that the path to healing would be long and full of challenges. Over time, I began to understand that forgiveness, if it ever came, would have to be for myself, so I could free myself, not for him. In the midst of this internal storm, unexpected messages arrived. As if he had a script ready, he tried to justify himself, saying he had changed, that he was sorry, that he wanted a chance to prove he could be different. Cold, calculated words that tore me apart, awakening a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. My weary heart refused to believe it, but something deep down, a still vulnerable part, felt tempted. Each message was a cruel test, an invitation to open a door I had closed with so much effort and pain. But I resisted. I knew that accepting his words would mean returning to a cycle of pain, lies, and disillusionment. My family and friends noticed my gradual transformation. Some were happy to see my newfound strengths. Others tried to warn me not to make room for him again. I listened to them all, but I knew the decision would be mine alone. And so, I made the hardest decision of my life, to cut all bridges once and for all. I blocked numbers, deleted messages, and avoided places that reminded me of him. I wanted to erase this toxic presence from my life so I could breathe, so I could find myself again. But cutting ties wasn't enough to silence the pain that lingered, deep and visceral. There were days when the weight of loneliness crushed me completely, when tears flowed uncontrollably, when I felt weak, vulnerable, and broken. In those moments, I wondered if I would ever overcome it all, if I would ever be whole again. Yet, even in the darkest hours, a small light insisted on shining. It was the certainty that, despite everything, I was alive, standing tall, fighting to regain my happiness, no matter how difficult it seemed. This light, however fragile, propelled me to move forward, to seek new paths, to allow myself to start over, even with fear, even with open scars. Because I knew, deep down, that I deserved more than a life marked by betrayal and lies. Today, I share my story not to seek easy answers, but to show that pain can be overcome, that strength exists within each of us, even when it seems hidden beneath layers of suffering. What about you? Have you ever faced a seemingly impossible decision? How did you navigate your own path and rebuild yourself? I want to hear your story, your strength, and yours. Leave a comment, like and share so this message reaches those in need. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the next chapters of this journey that is far from over. After months of trying to rebuild the broken pieces of my soul, I thought I had finally found some peace. That faint feeling that I was beginning to regain control of my life, that the pain might lessen with time, felt real, but life has its own ways of testing us, and meeting him again was the hardest ordeal I'd ever faced. It wasn't just a cruel twist of fate, it was as if all my deepest nightmares had taken shape that gray afternoon. When our eyes met in the market, amid the indifferent crowd, I walked slowly through the aisles, trying to concentrate on my shopping, focusing on the simple details of everyday life so as not to be overcome by the storm that still resided within me. My heart was pounding, my breath was coming in short gasps, but I told myself to keep going, not to look back. Until he appeared, like a shadow from the past I could no longer avoid. His face, familiar yet so distant, revealed a coldness that cut through me like a sharp blade. He was there, in front of me, but he seemed like a different person from the one I loved, the one who swore eternal love and built such painful lies. The shock paralyzed me. For a moment, the world around me disappeared, and it was just the two of us, in that space frozen in time. I could feel the weight of his gaze, but I found no response in the silence that followed. No words of sincere regret, no emotion that could soothe the open wound in my chest. Only that absence, that distance, made me understand that perhaps he had never been who I thought he was. That reunion, so unexpected and painful, was like a punch in the gut, showed me that the past I'd tried to bury still haunted me in ways I couldn't control. I wanted to scream, to confront him, to demand explanations, but my voice failed me. Pain, mixed with anger and sadness, left me powerless to act. And then he tried to speak, but his words were hollow, repeating excuses I'd heard 1,000 times, promises that rang false and empty. I resisted the temptation to open that door. I knew I couldn't let myself be swayed by those words that only reinforced the cycle of lies and suffering. I held my broken heart tightly and walked away, determined not to let him steal my peace again. In the days that followed, the weight of that experience crushed me. Doubt returned with a vengeance, accompanied by a whirlwind of consuming emotions. Would I have the courage to move forward, alone, without that man who, despite everything, was still part of my story? Could I rebuild my life without succumbing to the fear and insecurity he instilled in me? I felt torn between the past I couldn't erase and an uncertain future I desperately needed to conquer. Therapy became even more essential. In the sessions, I delved deep into my emotions, facing fears I'd never acknowledged, deconstructing limiting beliefs that had imprisoned me for years. It was a painful process of intense self-discovery, which made me understand that forgiveness and healing begin within. That self-love is the foundation for any true reconstruction. I needed to learn to love myself before anything else, to put myself first, to respect and protect myself above all else. At the same time, I began to rediscover life's simple pleasures that had been forgotten. The morning sun streaming through the window, the taste of fresh coffee, a song that played deep within my soul. I found comfort in the sincere conversations with my friends, who welcomed me without judgment, offering what I needed most, unconditional support and genuine presence. But the path to recovery wasn't linear. There were days when sadness overwhelmed me, when despair made me question everything, including my ability to move forward. In those moments, I remembered the strong woman I'd always been, the warrior, who endured so much pain and still had the strength to dream. And it was this woman I chose to be every day, even when the exhaustion seemed unbearable. Reuniting with him, though devastating, was a turning point. It taught me that I can't control the past, but I can choose how I live in the present and build my future, that my happiness can't depend on those who have hurt me, but rather on the love and respect I have for myself. That true freedom comes from letting go of what no longer serves us, even if it hurts. Today, I look back and see that that wounded and lost woman was the same one who taught me the value of resilience, courage, and hope. That, despite betrayal, lies, and pain, I am capable of getting up and starting over as many times as necessary. And that my story, with all its ups and downs, can inspire other women to find their own strength. The months that followed that unexpected reunion were a storm of emotions that consumed me from within and transformed me in ways I never imagined. Each day seemed to carry an unbearable weight, a painful mix of memories, pulling me back to the past and the desperate urge to move forward, rebuilding what had been destroyed. For a long time, I wallowed in unanswered questions, in a whirlwind of doubts about who I was, about what had allowed me to be so deceived. The betrayal hadn't just broken my trust in the other person, it had cracked the very foundation of my being, leaving me vulnerable, lost, and filled with fears I'd never experienced before. The sense of loss was profound, not just of love, but of my very identity, which seemed to be slowly crumbling. It was in this moment of fragility that I realized how much I had sacrificed myself to try to maintain a relationship that was already doomed. My desires, my dreams, my voice were silenced in favor of a hope that proved empty and treacherous. Recognizing this was painful, but it was also the first step toward finding myself again. I decided then that I needed to dedicate myself entirely to this reconstruction, not just to overcome the pain, but to rediscover who I was beyond that relationship. Beyond the woman who had been betrayed and humiliated, I began to allow myself to feel every emotion, even the most difficult ones, without trying to escape or deny what was inside me. I cried until I had no more tears. I screamed against the emptiness of my soul, and I allowed myself moments of absolute silence, where only I and my essence met. Little by little, I began searching for tools that could help me transform pain into learning. Meditation became a daily companion, bringing moments of peace that previously seemed impossible. Reading books on self-knowledge and overcoming obstacles opened new horizons and perspectives, showing me that I was not alone on this path. I also began writing a personal journal where I could pour out my deepest feelings, without fear of judgment, with the sole intention of understanding and healing myself. The relationships that truly mattered began to strengthen. Friends and family who stuck by me, even when I wasn't the easiest person to deal with, became my safe haven. I understood that vulnerability isn't weakness, but courage, and that accepting help is an act of self-love. In the midst of this process, I began to see new possibilities for my life. I enrolled in courses I'd always wanted to take but had put off for years. I resumed old hobbies that brought me joy and lightness. I made room for new relationships, but this time with a careful eye, prioritizing respect, sincerity, and reciprocity. Of course, not everything was a bed of roses. There were still days when sadness visited me unannounced, moments when the fear of not being enough pounded in my chest. But now I knew that these emotions were part of the journey, not insurmountable obstacles. Every fall was an opportunity to rise stronger, wiser. Looking back today, I see that all that pain served to make me a more whole woman, more aware of my worth and my needs. I learned to love myself in a way I'd never experienced before, and that my happiness depends solely on me. It's hard to explain what happens to us after so much suffering. I'm not talking about the physical, visible pain that others see and are moved by. I'm talking about that silent pain that settles inside like rust, slowly eroding faith, dreams, and trust in the world. This pain inhabited me and I carried it like someone carrying an entire body on their back. Sometimes, even getting out of bed seemed an impossible task. But there was a moment, which I can't pinpoint exactly, when something inside me stirred. It wasn't a beautiful epiphany. There was no background music or dramatic sunset. It was just a pause. A sigh between tears, in which for the first time I heard myself. A timid, almost suffocated voice that said, "You don't deserve to live like this anymore." And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I didn't disagree with that voice. It was mine, and I believed it. That's when I truly began to move beyond that grief. Because yes, losing trust, the life you've built, the ground you've found, is grief. It's like dying a little, and no one teaches you how to bury something that's still alive in memories. The photos, the clothes, the smells, the songs, even the mundane objects in the house, everything was a memory, everything hurt. But I no longer wanted to live immersed in that cemetery of broken hopes. It was time to choose myself. I started slowly. I changed my room. I gave away everything that was bad for me. I added new scents to the house. I went for a walk without a destination. I uninstalled social media to stop searching for things I shouldn't have. I changed my phone. I deleted numbers. Yes, I blocked them. Unceremoniously. It was liberating. For the first time in years, I started making decisions that were just for me, and not to please, maintain, or try to save something that was already dead long before I admitted it. But the most challenging part wasn't what I did outside. It was what I had to do inside. I had to face myself, face the woman who had shunned herself, who had endured too much, who believed in empty excuses, who had deluded herself with small gestures while sustaining enormous wounds. I had to forgive this woman, embrace her, tell her myself that I understood, that I wasn't weak, that I had only loved with everything, and that it was okay. That now was the time to love differently, to love myself. Therapy did help, but the greater process was lonely. There were nights spent staring at the ceiling, remembering conversations, glances I swore were true. It was accepting that I was deceived. Yes, that he had another family. That he lied to my face. That he lived 2 lives without blinking. That he made me look like a fool. And that maybe he doesn't even feel guilty. That part was hard to digest. Because we always hope that, at the very least, the other person will regret it. But that doesn't always happen, and we have to move on even without that apology that never comes. Reconnecting with myself wasn't quick. Even today, sometimes, I hear my heart wavering. I have days when the pain returns, out of nowhere, and visits me with force. But it no longer rules me. I learned to embrace it, to sit with it, to let it remind me of what I've overcome. And I move on. With more calm, more truth, more presence. Today, I choose everything. Who stays, who enters, what touches me, what I can no longer tolerate. I allowed myself to meet new people, yes, cautiously, with reservations, but with my heart still capable of feeling. Because life didn't stop. Because I didn't die in that trauma. I was reborn. I was reborn scarred, but alive. Tired, but stronger. And with a love for myself I'd never known before. The hardest part was understanding that freedom hurts. It hurts to leave a place you've grown accustomed to, even if that place slowly kills you. It hurts to grow, but it hurts much less than remaining trapped with someone who diminishes you. And if you're reading this now and feel like you can't leave, I tell you, you can. Not all at once. It's one small step a day. A small choice that changes everything. A firm no. A silence where there was once a plea. A tear you wipe away and move on. Today, I choose to be mine. I choose to wake up and live a life that isn't based on being accepted by anyone. I'm no longer his woman. I'm the woman who survived abandonment, lies, and breakdown, and still found beauty in her own company. What no one tells you is that, after months of picking up the pieces, after rebuilding everything with your own hands, your self-esteem, your life, your breath, sometimes the past comes knocking, and it hits hard. In my case, it didn't just knock. It tried to break down the door I'd spent so long closing. It came back. Yes, after everything. After the lies, after the other family. After the lame excuses and cowardly silences, he had the audacity to reappear as if time had healed everything, as if the wound were already dry, as if he still had some claim on me. It was an ordinary afternoon. I was returning from work, tired but calm, almost at peace, and my cell phone rang. An unknown number. For some reason, I answered, and all it took was a hello for me to recognize the voice. It was him, the man who destroyed my life. The fake father of the perfect family that never existed, the author of the greatest prank in my history. At first, my hand shook, my heart raced, not from longing, it was anger, it was surprise, it was shock. He began with, "I just wanted to know how you are," as if he had any right to ask. As if I owed him an update on my life. As if he hadn't left me with my chest ripped open, stitched shut, and without anesthesia. I took a deep breath. So deep it hurt, and I said, "What do you want?" He fell into a dramatic silence, the kind that only works in bad soap operas. And he replied, "I wanted to see you. To talk calmly. To look into your eyes. I miss you." And in that moment, I felt like the entire universe stopped to observe me. It was as if an old version of me was there too, anxiously awaiting my reaction. The version that would have given in. That would have cried. That would have agreed to have coffee just to get a little bit of affection. But she no longer controlled me. "Do you miss me? Or do you miss having someone to lie to better?" I asked. My voice was firm, and I didn't even recognize it. He stammered. He tried to change the subject. He used that low tactic of reminiscing about happy times. As if they erased everything. As if the fact that we once smiled together justified the hell he put me through later. No. Those moments existed, yes. But the woman who lived through them no longer exists. She died the day she discovered the other family. She buried herself when she read love messages addressed to another woman. While he slept in our bed, she stopped breathing when she learned his son called another woman Mommy. At the same time, he smiled beside me during a romantic dinner. That woman died, and in her place was born a version of me he will never know. I hung up, no yelling, no crying, no fuss, I just hung up. But after I hung up, I cried. Because it still hurt. It hurt that he thought he could come back. It hurt that he believed my dignity was for sale. It hurt that he showed up just when I was learning to be happy without needing anyone. And you know what was hardest? Not giving in. Because, even though I knew he didn't even deserve my good morning, part of me still wanted to believe that this time would be different. Part of me still missed the routine, the familiar touch, the feeling of belonging. But it wasn't love. It was need. It was trauma. It was memory trying to reverse the script. And it was in this internal conflict that I had to make the biggest choice of my life, choosing for myself. Not for him. Not for the us. That was never true. Not for a love that only existed on my part. I chose for myself. Life has taught me that the hardest lesson doesn't always come with pain. Sometimes it comes with temptation. Sometimes it comes with the possibility of returning to one's comfort zone. But the woman who has survived the lie can no longer live on crumbs. The woman who has rebuilt her heart with patience cannot hand it over to the same tormentor again. So I moved on. I deleted the number. I blocked the contact. I talked to my therapist. I cried some more. Then I went to make dinner. I turned on some light music. I had a glass of wine. I went to bed early. And do you know what happened the next day? Nothing. The world moved on. The pain didn't kill me, and I felt more alive than ever. Because there comes a time when we need to prove to ourselves that we won't betray ourselves anymore. That we won't abandon ourselves anymore. That we won't kneel for those who stepped on us. That time has come for me, and I truly hope it comes for you too. Getting here sometimes feels like a strange dream, as if that woman crying alone on the bathroom floor, hugging a cell phone full of evidence of her own humiliation, were someone else. And, deep down, she is. Because pain transforms. Loss teaches. Disappointment, tears. But it also opens space for us to be reborn. And I was reborn. In silence, in my own time, in my own way, without an audience. But no one prepares you for what comes after you heal. Because healing isn't forgetting. Healing is remembering, not bleeding. Healing is understanding that something was part of your history, but it no longer defines who you are. Healing is wanting to live, even with the scars. It's waking up and not thinking about it anymore. It's remembering without hurting. It's, above all, not wanting to go back. And what happened after all of this was exactly what proved to me that I was cured. Months after that last contact, the one where he tried to get back together, where I hung up the phone and refused to give in, he showed up again, but this time, different, defeated, remorseful, carrying the weight of his wrong choices on his shoulders. His other family, it fell apart. The woman he chose to live with in parallel, she found out everything too. He was alone. He lost respect, friends, and his reputation. And then, as always, he tried to return to where he thought he was still